seen startups, they have this beautiful office and you're like, why is it necessary for you to have this Burj Khalifa view?
They want to be able to impress maybe their investors with a good setup, good office or whatever.
You're not getting in a relationship with an investor just because they're giving you a check, but they could be very involved in your business. Maybe that's what you need. Maybe you don't need that, but
all right.
Okay.
So I think you were asking about bootstrapping and raising money, not raising money, and
Smart versus
dumb money. Yeah.
I think there's this confusion that raising money is a success metric. This is number one. Raising money is just one of your strategies for growing your business. And I think this is kind of fueled by, and not just in the Middle East, but in all emerging markets, and I think even in developed markets, certain entrepreneurs, especially because of the way the media covers raising money and valuations, which we all know in some cases are, hot air balloons. Like, honestly, nobody knows how these valuations are being made at some point. And it is a free market model. So the more people want to pay for it, the more, that's the value of the startup. And that's what we think it's going to get valued at. But it's not. Raising money is not a success metric. And this is the real thing that we need to talk about, which is in 2012, there was a lot of cool companies, 2010 and 11 in the Middle East, that managed to raise VC money, but they were not cut out for the VC track. And so they faded away, and they still exist today. They're profitable businesses. They're just never going to 10x. They're never going to 20x. Now we know this. Now we know that not every entrepreneur is cut out for the VC model, which is, if you're going to raise money from VCs need returns. And those returns need to be made in 7 to 10 years. You signed up for this. I'm not saying it's a bad track. It is a track. And you not complain when a VC hounds you to make that happen. They have their own LPs. They have their investors. They need to do returns. If you don't want that path, and that is not something that you want to sign up for, don't raise money. Make products that sell and sustain yourself. Figure out how to do a bootstrap model that allows you to get to a space where you can, subsidize your operations from selling your product. Reasonably, that is a path where you're not going to buy a Rolls Royce day one. So also be realistic about your pricing, because obviously that's not going to happen. And there's, we look at Basecamp as the role models in that space. They like to dunk on VCs a lot. I know they've built some enemies on that space, but they've built a successful model that works. And there's others that have done that as well, like MailChimp and others. And they've exited eventually with 100% ownership. So, the ones that have exited with 100% ownership haven't made the big bucks, honestly.
Yeah, of course.
Because your other path is you raise money, you burn, and you go down that path, and you're very realistic and transparent that these investors should be your partners. It's a marriage with this investor for the next 7 to 10 years to reach that 10x, 20x pivot, do everything it takes to make the right returns. And obviously, I'm not saying you should sell out your soul for it. Like, it's not, float or die. That's not the model, but this is the reality, and you shouldn't hate investors for it. The reason we're saying this is there is also the bad scenario where you are married to this investor and they're horrible for 7 to 10 years, or they're useless. And that's kind of your worst case scenario. So between bootstrapping, not even vultures. Vultures are probably even at least they're trying to do something. There's people that just take money from someone who never shows up. They never do anything for them. And that's horrible, because entrepreneurship is difficult. It's exhausting. It's grueling. Mental strain. You need a partner in crime. You need someone to help you, to push you forward. And if you're just taking money from someone, take a loan, or bootstrap. If it's between bad money, good money, and if it's between bad money or bootstrapping is probably healthier for your mentality. and for your survival.
And your integrity, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is, a good investor will save you a lot of money. One, a lot of investors have subsidized free services through their networks, even consultants, even mentors, advisors. They're able to do connections. They're able to do sales for you. They're open policy doors for you. Even product, they'll get you discounts on product. You're able to connect with their other successful portfolio members, and they're able to become your social network that is, cheaper than therapy.
Definitely.
Good for your soul.
Exactly. And so, and this goes back to another thing, which is what I've seen also is sometimes you have smart money next to you, but you don't know how to ask, or you don't know you can ask. If you are funded by a successful VC who has had successful startups in their portfolio before, even if you're not aware of it, they probably have services that they can help you with. Ask them for it. And if it's not them, ask them to connect you with their other portfolio companies. There's no reason for them to say no. If there's other successful people in their portfolio, there's no reason for, obviously, if you're like really, really early on and you're asking for an intro to someone that's exited, be a little realistic about it. But use your VC, make them earn the money, the equity they put in your company.
Yep.
I mean, you gotta be really thoughtful about how that relationship develops, right? I mean, the whole point of any kind of relationship is that it adds value and gives value back somehow, or gets value back depending on the side that you're on. It sounds like, when you were describing this relationship, it sounds like you're talking about like just being a good dad, because I heard the other day that apparently 90% of being a good dad is just showing up. And I'm a new dad, so I'm figuring these things out. And a lot of these dynamics are actually not so alien to us in everyday life. It's just, I think we try and box them because we have these preconceived expectations, or we've read this article that says prescribed a certain way of dealing with relationships. But truth is that you're not married, you're not getting in a relationship with an investor just because they're giving you a check, but they could be very involved in your business. Maybe that's what you need, maybe you don't need that. But kind of defining that perimeter and owning that relationship is such a core component of nurturing. And I mean, what investor would respect you if you didn't really have clarity yourself? So I think both sides get a bad rep, but that's probably because it's just poorly managed expectations. And
I agree. There's a lot of this. Like you said, a couple of really good points, Rasha and Zohair as well. Um, uh, I know a lot of entrepreneurs who have a lot of smart money around them, but A, are either shy to ask, or B, do not know how to ask, and that's something that's uh, lessons I've learned as an entrepreneur is, what's the worst case going to happen? If they say no, it's a no, right? So, but you need to ask. Nobody will assume, or nobody is going to go and put their neck out there. And then, you need to really ask. And that's something that is, I would say that's a lesson to all first time entrepreneurs. Ask, you have, what's the
And
worst
it's
thing
not
they say is
unfair.
no.
Yeah.
It's
No,
not
no.
unfair for investors to ask you a million questions. At the end of the day, it's their money, So if you if you believe in your product, if you know about your customers, like you said earlier, if you've interviewed a couple of customers, I mean, a couple doesn't mean a couple dozen maybe, yeah, and you and you know what your product is, then I'm sure you'll be able to answer those questions.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's I go through I'm going through this whole dynamic of building relationships with investors, and I haven't raised any money successfully yet, but I've also found that the process is actually quite enlightening, because you discover as you go through the exercise that the kind of things that they ask you are often less to do with your ability to actually build a good business and whether you're even a good founder to invest in the first place, right? So that becomes like the first thought in their mind is like, I'm not asking these questions because I expect them to have the answers. No founder has that entire sort of skill set. They partner with people, they bring a co-founder on board to offset something, they engage somebody for free support, an investor will help you. That's the point of developing that knowledge, right? But that fear of taking that first step and not asking that question, for fear of rejection, and then what will others say.
Yeah.
You can spend your whole life going around in circles without making that first step. I did that. I was so scared of, because I was like, no, the MVP is not ready. No, the product document is not right. No, what will investors think? So afraid of shame. You have to fall a bunch of times when you realize that, every time I get rejected, I'm actually much richer than the next person because I've actually figured out something else that doesn't work. It's so counterintuitive to be an entrepreneur. I find sometimes it's just like the opposite of good sense. All the stuff that we've taught. It's just everything is like you have to unlearn everything and be like, but that doesn't make any sense. That's the point. That's why you're going against the grain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think there's also something I actually want to hear everybody's thought about, because I deal with a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, whether in tech or non. And when they say, "Could you help us find an investor?" and if the product's interesting, I do make a phone calls. But people like entrepreneurs sometimes are a bit naive as well, because a lot of times they think, oh, there's money out there, especially the ones that worked in investment banking. They've raised hundreds of millions of dollars for people. They think, yeah, like for this product I can get $100,000, no problem. And then like people do not understand like any kind of relationship. Like nobody's ever gonna write you a check in the first time you sit with them. Actually, it happened once in my whole life, but that is like super, super, super rare. Um, an average relationship, for even if you have a business that is on fire and growing exponentially,
Right.
we're talking about 6 to 9 months. That's like on an easy sake, up to a year. And people think, oh, I need money now. Well, you should have done it 6 months ago, kind of thing. So but I think that is also misled, you know what I mean? And I'm going to tie that up to what Rasha said earlier. These what we call vultures, or whatever you want to call them, that call in and say, I'm going to send you a proposal for a startup, and then they send you like $20,000 a month or whatever, 20,000 dirhams even, for a startup. That's like an astronomical number for them. I'm going to help you do this and that. And startups don't even have money, but because they find the name, they've been carried on an article, or somebody wrote an article about them. They think, oh, suddenly this company is the next
On cloud
uh,
nine.
exactly, Uber or whatever. And they're a startup, they have money. Like the amount of people I spoke to, they say, yeah, all these startups are like cash rich. I'm like, I don't know what startups you're talking about, because everybody around me is like barely making it. You know what I mean? Like I know many founders who haven't been paid yet. So like a monthly salary. So yeah, I know, Rasha, you have something to say about this.
Yeah, but I think we have there's a bit of like a weird situation right now, because one is, we know 90% of the services we've used today that are run by startups are literally subsidized by VC money. They have no profitability model.
Yeah.
So in one place, this is kind of, I feel, how the service providers fear about these startups. They're burning the cash anyway. So just one more page, one more line item on their balance sheet will make a difference. So I think, but that's a different discussion altogether. Like, are these businesses ever going to be profitable?
That's another episode.
Yeah, that's like a whole episode.
Might be a season, actually. That might be a season. I fear.
This was a joke. A friend of mine was like, she messaged me in reply to one of the news we were publishing. She's like, how do these guys make money? I'm like everyone makes money, VCs. Like I don't get it. It's the joke right now. And I guess it's definitely difficult, and in certain sectors, your expenses are higher than your average software company. And this goes back to something that a lot of the skeptics have been saying for a long time, which is, can we please stop treating non-pure software businesses as software businesses with the same valuation scales, because it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
I can't value Basecamp the same way I value Uber, and I definitely can't value Salesforce, which is that pioneered this space, and this kinds of valuations the same way I value WeWork for the most immediate.
Train of thought.
Kind of,
Walking on eggshells here. No.
I'm just listening to this podcast by Bloomberg on like it's a new series podcast on WeWork, and it's just mind blowing.
Oh, yeah. I
The
finished
one
it a
the one in
little while
Wonder
ago.
is really
It's
good. The
amazing,
Wonder.
and what they went through.
Is
The
it?
one
Is
on
it?
Wonder. The one on Wonder is called We Crashed. It's
We crashed. Yeah,
Oh,
that's the one.
okay. I'll look
that
it
one
up.
is really good. Wondery
Whoa.
does usually a very good job. They have a series called Business Wars, and they've featured them in one of them. So very well done. The research is done properly too. So a big recommendation for them. I
Yeah.
actually listened to a lot of their wars and like the actual interactions between those two companies or whatever. They have a lot of good episodes. Everybody who knows me, I keep pushing on them Mars versus Hershey's, because that is a quite of a bit of a story. It's non-tech related, but it's a very nice, healthy little. Anyway, so Rasha, you were saying?
Yeah. No, just like it's a more complicated debate than just vultures. It's the model itself, and I think we've gotten to a point where I like in all the tech podcasts I listen to right now, the conversation is very clear that you got away with this from 2005 till 2020, but the era of Uber is over, and the Uber model of fundraising, that's over. People are more careful about your unit economics right now. People want to know where the money is going, how things are going. And I think VCs are going to be more diligent about how you're spending your money moving forward, because you've been operating for the past 3-4 months from home with ridiculously low expenditure in comparison to previous times. If you're one of those businesses, obviously some businesses had very high burn because of other factors, that you're able to cut costs to a minimum at the moment and operate. And if you've done that, how can you maintain that? And I was just last night listening to an episode on Masters of Scale where they interviewed the previous CEO of DuPont, and she's currently the CEO of Carbon, the 3D printing company. And she joined I think her name was Elizabeth, I'm not sure. And she joined both companies just before economic crises in both times. And apparently this is her third pre-crisis business that she joined.
Oh.
And one of the things that I thought was really remarkable that she did at DuPont was she asked her team to say, what if we had to cut 50% of the leadership? And DuPont's huge. It's not even a tech company. It's massive. And she said, what if we had to cut 50% of your leadership teams? What are the creative business ways you can do to maintain our clients and our servicing and so forth? And she said, I didn't tell them this was an exercise. We pushed it through. Everyone creatively came in with ideas. We ended up only cutting 12%. Wow. But all the creativity that came from this showed us that there was a different way of doing business.
Yeah.
And I think this is a very interesting exercise to say, what if I had to, I don't think any startup has 50% leadership maybe. That is, that might be like ending up with yeah, but maybe what if I had to cut down my staff to half? Or what if I had to cut down my burn to half? How can I do that? And what are the different creative ways of doing it?
Sure.
And I think it's a healthy exercise, because in a boom market, we get comfortable. The money's coming in, the investors are happy to spend. We're enjoying it. We have a cornflakes bar in our office and 300 kinds of milk and,
Yeah.
Whatever.
And flowers, a bouquet of flowers every day.
Or whatever, all that stuff. And
fresh donuts. Fresh donuts.
I'm not saying you shouldn't do these things. If you can, do it. But then don't do it at the expense of, because, your team is going to be like, I'm burnt out. I'd rather you pay me better than having this extravagant 5-star buffet every Thursday. And I've seen and heard this from people that work at startups very constantly. The team is like, I'll trade some of this for some time with my kids if you're able to pay a little bit more for technology that will help automate my work. Invest in your product. Like, we're saying all this stuff about frugality, but the reason I want you to save all this money is to say, invest in engineering, invest in your product, invest in your team. Like, this is where your money needs to go. If you're gonna get in one point where you're saying, look, I'm gonna take 50% of this expenditure and I'm gonna be able to pay better salaries or better healthcare or invest more in my tech, in my infrastructure, do that. Keep your burn rate high, invest in making a better product. By all means, don't be cheap on your product.
Yeah.
Just between product and cornflakes bar, please pick the product.
Prioritize.
100.
You know, I used to work with a fintech startup quite a while back. It was back in 2008, and I was there for about 8 months. And 4 months in, we got this email saying, you know, we're gonna have a little bit of a rocky ship because money's tight. And small team, you know, I mean, we have like employees in the range of about maybe 20, 25 people across 3 cities of Pakistan. And people are taking a decent salary. It's not like terrible money. It's pretty decent money. But the problem with decent money is that it's only decent when it comes. And so when this email came halfway through my career with these guys, we were like, okay, sure, you know, we're vested, we believe in what we're doing, so sure, we can survive a month or 2, we'll figure it out. 3 months, 4 months, I left, and to this date they owe me, like, you know, a pretty decent amount of cash. But I always remember 2 things from that story that's completely deeply tie into what you just said, Racha. First was that one of my major KPIs was to materialize some components of the business plan, the commercial side of it, and then monetize it by building a relationship with someone to go and implement. And we signed the first major deal with a telecom operator to roll out the first SMS-based mobile banking system, which would basically bank the unbanked, which is like the bottom of the pyramid. So it's like massive scale, right? Cheap, like you could basically start digitizing cigarette transactions and, you know, micro payments. With very simple SMS-based instructions. And this is, you know, pre, like, you know, 3G, 4G. So, you know, people are still using feature phones very heavily. And so I signed the deal. We were supposed to get this license, which was for cheap. It was just around the same amount of money that they owed me. They didn't get the license. I'd gone on a holiday. You know, so my wife and I were like, we got to take a break. So came back, found out they hadn't gotten the license. Nobody had still been paid. And they started like asking people to go. I was like, you know what, I can't do this anymore. So I walked away from this, and I thought that maybe I'll get it back. They even tried to get the laptop back from me. I'm like, no way, I need my money first. But I always remember this one thing that always used to really, really annoy me a great deal, which is that they had a company car, and the company car was worth approximately 3 times the amount of money that they owed me, which means that they could have easily paid me and 2 other people in full, or at least 50% to twice that number of people, right? They never sold a car. And the car was not necessary because everyone was happy to use public transport. We were all bootstrapping in our minds, physically work, whatever, right? And the idea of misaligned priorities for CEOs or company founders, especially at a time when you're hitting a crisis. And as a founder of a company that now we have like payroll of about 18, 20 people. The first thing we do when we sense crisis coming is we get on a call with everyone. We're like, guys, listen, shit's about to hit the fan. This is where we are right now. We're not going to lay anybody off. We're not cutting any salaries, but if we need to, this is a 3-month window that we need to let you know. So so we try and give them time to prepare. And then what we need to do, and we touched on this in a previous episode as well, is we'll mitigate this in a way that gets everyone on board, in a way that isn't like top down, hierarchy, like we're a corporate and we're going to make decisions and pass it on. Like this DuPont example was brilliant. I love that because it's a mega corporation that's inclusive. And the idea of having a shared vision, which for me is like one of the most it's a cornerstone of running a business, is that whoever you bring on board, whether it's someone who's cleaning your floors, like a cleaning service, or somebody who's making strategic decisions with you, you need to buy into whatever you're doing together, so that when things are rocky, that's the time when everyone steps up and says, you know what, gloves are off, rolling up the sleeves. We're going to do whatever we can to make this thing survive because we believe in it. That's the currency of exchange that pays much greater than a monthly salary.
But
But
you know what,
don't,
Zuhair, another part to it is, if you get into, if you're a startup and if you get into the fancy things and spending on fancy items rather than focusing on your product and your employees, those very employees are the first one who's gonna jump off the ship, because they realize that, you know, this is going tank,
the ship is burning.
and they don't have the priorities right. You know, like for your example, I mean, rather than selling the company car, you know, they would have opted to pay you off, or 5 6 other people, half a dozen other people. Then you guys would have more stake in the company, you guys would have emotional stake in the company, right? And then
Yeah.
when you saw that that's not happening, then you're like, okay, the basics are wrong, the values are wrong, you know, they're never going to be behind my back, why should I be there, you know, when they need me?
Yeah, and
Agreed.
you see this a lot. I think Abe mentioned, I think this stats I heard from you, Abe, before, which is this concept that, and I see this a lot with VCs and with startups, they feel like, oh, it's okay if people leave, like we'll hire others, there's other people that want jobs. But the cost of turnover per employee is 14 months of salary. I think this is something Abe mentioned to me once, and that kind of stuck in my head. I think I've told this stat to everyone I know at this moment. Like I've propagated this idea because there's this misconception, and I think A16Z wrote an article about this, which is there's this misconception of the rockstar engineer in Silicon Valley that you can take this model and plop it into anywhere in the world, and that's not the case. Yep. There are no rockstar engineers anywhere outside Silicon Valley, and this is not to toot the horn of Silicon Valley. I think this is one of the problems of Silicon Valley, which is causing kind of a lot of things to unravel right now, which is this notion of a rock star engineer, and we'll just pay them hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, and that's okay, and we're going to tolerate their negative behavior when they behave negatively. The advantage we have in emerging markets is we have rock star teams, and so you're able to replace that one person with a hungry group of engineers, whether 3 to 4, 5, however your business is modeled, they can come from diverse backgrounds, they can able to bounce ideas off of each other and collaboratively grow together. And it's harder to poach a team than to poach a person. So if you're able to invest and give the right incentives, mission, and role model for your team, you're able to keep them. Because if you're going to tell people, I'm going to downsize and cut costs, and you continue to fly business class and first class, no one's going to buy that. It's a smokescreen. Let's not pretend people don't know how the leader of the company is behaving or spending or doing. And I'm not saying founders should be frugal forever. Like there is a point where if you're living on an airplane 200 days, you're traveling 200 days a year, you should be giving yourself some privilege on that. And, maybe flying business class is not so bad for you because, it helps you with your mental state of being as well. But you need to balance it out. When you're telling your team I'm cutting costs, you need to cut costs as well. You need to role model the behavior that you want from your team. You shouldn't be splurging on, a very high-end office when the rest of your team is sitting in a slummy place that's ugly with bad lighting and bad services. You need to role model this behavior for your team and be the leader that shows them how it's done. And that means when times are good, it's good for everybody. And when times are slow, it's slow for everybody. And don't think that people, honestly, exactly like you said, Zuhair, it's if there is things, people know it's a startup, it's small, it's an SME, it's small. People see things. People are not blind, people are not stupid, people can do math. And they can go into the inventory in the kitchen and see how many bottles of whatever is there and how many, and I think the running joke in most startups is we've gotten to the point where it's Nescafe Red, not Nescafe Gold.
That's when things are bad. Sachets from the hotels.
No,
I'm stealing every time I travel to a hotel.
The sugar packets, yes, and the brown sugar.
The quality of toilet paper has dropped.
Single ply. Oh no.
Yeah.
We're in single ply mode.
Oh
And
God.
this is the kind of things like I think this is like a joke I've heard from so many people. Like we've got like this. It must be bad. The toilet paper quality. Is just
No, but
and
this is not about startups only, Rasha.
yeah, this is everybody. Corporates as
Everywhere.
well.
I mean, even if you're a decade or 4 decades old company, this is the first thing that comes up. I mean, you see people being laid off at the bottom tier, and then on top tier you see
100%.
The dumbest thing.
top heavy organizations. Hiring is continuously going on. Yes, we need big names to make sure we have this strategy, blah blah, all of that fancy thing, and the people are thinking like you're firing like 50, 100 people
Hardest working
at the
people.
bottom line,
Yeah, exactly.
and you're hiring 5 new big guns who are more than those 100 people salary combined. That
But this
doesn't
is
make
something
sense.
we saw something different this COVID, which is I think it was the CEO of Marriott, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah,
and he
said
went out. He was actually sick and not even in the company, and came back in just to say, none of our leadership team is going to take salaries. We're just not going to fire anyone. And this is something we did not see in
even
2000.
Visa.
And I think
did that. Yeah.
Airbnb did that as well. A whole bunch of people did. At least like the founders cut their salaries out. And this is something we didn't see in 2008. 2008, it was purely financial businesses, financial institutes, and financial services. And I think the frustration has built up since then because we saw lots of people getting laid off, and financial, the CEOs of these big private equity and financial institutes and were getting bonuses and left with exit packages that have set them up for life. And the unique thing about this COVID situation was no matter how you feel about all these big brands, and some people are saying, this was just for show or whatever, but I think it did create a role model of expectations of what leadership is like. If you're gonna look, if you're the CEO of something as big as Marriott or Visa or any of these massive companies, you can definitely live a year without a salary. And if you can't, I think we have a different problem to talk about on your financial management. That's
another season.
That's your personal issue with the way you manage your money, but you don't make minimum wage. And unfortunately, the scale has tipped so much that so many people make minimum wage. It's ridiculous how much you can, one salary of yours can, exactly like your example, could have saved so many people so much time and effort and livelihoods. And
save the company.
Yeah, at least save people's lives, if not the company.
Yeah.
And their families and everything. And this is just like from a social responsibility perspective, but from a company perspective, rehiring that person that's been dedicated to your business at the lower rung of the scale, that's been with you for 5 years, is not cheap. Because when the boom starts coming, everyone is going to be hiring again. And you're going to be competing. And they're going to say, you did not stand up for me when I needed you.
Right.
I don't want to work with you. And that's something, I don't know how much money in years you're going to spend to fix, whether you're a startup or a corporate. It's the same. If you were mean to your employees when they needed you, good luck.
Yeah. Well, Racha, this was, we can talk for hours, and clearly, I know we've done that before. So this was very, very insightful. Thank you a lot. I really genuinely appreciate you for coming on and sharing your thoughts on this issue. The burn is a topic that every investor and every founder should be thinking about. I think I've heard it myself told to me, what is your burn like? I think that's the first question an investor asks you, especially if you're in tech. But yes, it was a very clear, insightful conversation. I want to thank everybody as well. I want to thank you, Farrukh and Zuhair, for adding to this conversation. Um, I don't have anything else to add. If you guys want to come in on this, please feel free to do so. Like if every one of us can do like a one-liner, it'll be nice. We'll start with you, Rasha, I guess, as the guest.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm so happy, so honored to be the first guest on the show. You guys it's always a fun dynamic of listening to you guys shooting ideas at each other. It's fun. I think the one takeaway, if a startup or any founder, corporate startup, anything is, between your team and anything that is not your product, your team is your product in one way or the other. So between your team and product and everything else, invest in, that should be your biggest chunk of money. Not everything else is an add-on. Even an office, if you can do it without an office and invest in your team more, then really put your priorities straight so that your team puts you as their priority as well.
Racha, thanks. It was just as good, if not better, than I had hoped. And looking forward to chatting about this stuff more as we kind of continue. And thank you very much for being our first guest. It's actually our honor to have you here. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points that you mentioned, just to kind of, as my wrap up, because we're so aligned on a lot of things that we talk about on the show and things that we experience. And part of the idea is that we have a very nonchalant kind of a discussion about things that people aren't talking about enough, or broadly enough, or widely enough. It's too much on the glamour, too much on the excitement and the fun, but not enough on the realities and the grit that you really need, and the practicality as well. I think two things that really stood out for me. One thing that I really tell my clients as well is that, most of the time they're not their own customers, right? So they need to kind of take themselves out of the matrix and just watch and ask their customers. But the other thing that I thought was really important, and this is something that I truly live by, is the idea of, doing everything as cheap as possible until the necessary evolves, right? And if I could put a term around that, I call it like MVP yourself,
Yeah.
Basically do the bare minimum that's necessary, because that's actually exactly what's needed and nothing more. You define what that is, and very enlightening. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you so much, Racha. It was a great discussion. And I think with all of the valuable points that we've had in this session, my takeaway and what I would like to say would just be that value your product, value your team more than your product, because at the end of the day, when tough times come in, the value of your resources is much higher than your product. You can always pivot on product. You can always pivot on your values, your MVPs, but you can never ever get back those loyal and engaged employees. Actually, I always say, customers, yes, they're very important, but I think your team is much more important than that. And at the end of the day, everybody has to pay their bills. Everybody has to run their households. So you can bootstrap as much as you want, but if your team is not coherent, if your team is not engaged with you enough, with your idea, basically, there's nothing in the world that can replace that.
Yeah.
I had a great time, guys.
It was great.
Yeah, me too. Awesome. Thank you. Good
Thank
stuff.
you, Rashad,
All
very
right,
much.
thanks,
Thank you,
Raf.
guys.
It was awesome.
Take care.
Enjoy
Take
the rest
care.
of
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.